In Indianapolis in 1977, Tony is driving his car, cursing at people who get in his way. When he reaches his destination, he parks and accidentally snaps his key. He grabs a box and walks into the Meridian Mortgage Company. Tony gets annoyed when he sees there is a new receptionist. He says he has a meeting with the owner, M.L. Hall. The receptionist asks him to sit and wait. Seconds later, she receives a call and tells Tony there has been a scheduling error because Hall is on vacation. In Florida, Hall is currently being rude to a waiter. Back at the office, Tony complains to the receptionist, but Hall's son Richard steps in and says Tony can meet with him instead. Richard offers sympathy for Tony's injured arm and leads him into Hall's office. Tony makes sure the doors close before pulling plans out of the box. Richard opens them and looks confused by the drawing of a weapon. At the same time, Tony pulls out a revolver and drops his bandage, showing his arm is fine. He says he wants the world to know the company scammed him. Then he wraps a dead man's wire around Richard's neck. The wire is connected to a shotgun that will fire if Richard moves too much or tries to escape. A window cleaner appears outside and Tony tenses, but Richard tells him the cleaner cannot see inside because the windows are one way. Tony forces Richard to call 911. When the operator answers, Tony takes the phone and even gives his full name, saying the Hall family ruined his life. The secretary knocks, but Richard sends her away. Tony gives the operator the company address and says the Hall family scammed him for $5 million 4 years ago. He calls loan companies the biggest devils and hangs up. Soon the police surround the building and an employee tells all clients to leave. Tony planned to go home, but since his key broke, he says they will take Richard's car instead, parked 2 blocks away. They go down the stairs and meet a guard, but the guard backs off when Tony threatens to shoot Richard. In the lobby, several police officers are waiting, but they step aside and let them pass without anyone getting hurt. Outside, more cops keep their distance and follow carefully. A priest approaches Tony and tries to talk him down with religious quotes, but Tony insults him and keeps walking. Detective Michael is called as backup. He is surprised when he hears Tony's name because he recognizes him as the awkward guy from the bar. Michael finds Tony and Richard and approaches with a calm, friendly tone, trying to convince Tony to let Richard go. A news van tries to reach the scene but is blocked by a police car. One officer steps out with his gun raised, so Michael yells at him until he lowers it. The reporters begin recording everything. Tony slips on the snowy street and nearly triggers the wire, almost killing Richard, but he steadies himself in time. Then a car crashes into a snow mound nearby, and Tony gets tired of delays. He forces an officer to give him handcuffs and locks them onto Richard's wrist. Tony tells the cops where he is going and even tells them to follow. He forces Richard to drive a police car and leaves. Reporter Linda calls her producer and says her team will follow Tony too. Several police cars follow the duo across town. Tony has to move carefully because any sudden motion tightens the wire around Richard's neck. When they reach Tony's home, Tony tries using the police car intercom but keeps pressing the wrong button, so Michael guides him. Michael claims his men are already inside. Tony immediately calls him out and says it is a lie because he booby-trapped the apartment with explosives. He demands to be allowed to go up to his apartment and tells the police to bring someone higher up because this is serious. The reporters arrive in time to film Tony taking Richard into the building and screaming at any officer who pulls a gun. As they climb the stairs, they are recorded through the windows. Inside the apartment, Tony locks the door and forces Richard into a specific chair. He ties him down and connects the wire to a contraption on the table, positioning the shotgun on a pile of books so the dead man's switch stays active. Tony turns on the radio, presses a glass to Richard's mouth to make him drink, and says he is being a good host. He says he tested the contraption for weeks and it works perfectly. Outside, residents flee the building while Linda reports live. Michael forces her behind the barricade, explaining they are evacuating the area. When Chief Gallagher arrives, Tony spots snipers appearing on nearby rooftops. He immediately shouts at them, warning that he will set off the explosives if they try anything. After seeing his building on the news, Tony yells at Richard, blaming the company for destroying his development plans. Gallagher calls the apartment. Tony holds the phone close so Gallagher can hear him shouting at Richard. Tony says the company loaded the loan with so much interest that it left him buried in debt, and then Hall bought the land Tony planned to use to help poor people. Tony tells Gallagher he wants a written agreement from the company and the county clerk's office that will erase his debt and compensate him financially. He also wants to walk out as a free man and receive an apology from Hall. He hangs up before Gallagher can respond. When Richard complains that the handcuffs are too tight, Tony apologizes and promises he will let him speak to his family later. Across the country, people learn the details through the news. Tony had land he wanted to develop into a shopping center, but the mortgage company kept steering him toward other sites instead of the one he already had. They did it on purpose to waste time and force him deeper into payments until they could take control. Eventually, Richard is allowed to speak with his wife, and Tony tells her he is sorry. As soon as the call ends, Gallagher calls again and says Tony's brother is on the way. Then he hands the line to Prosecutor George, who says they have prepared a statement that clears Tony's debt and tells him to turn on Channel 9. On TV, the company's head of finance apologizes to Tony for what happened. While Tony watches, Richard slowly slides some papers on the table, inching the revolver closer. When the apology ends, Tony yells at Gallagher. He does not want an employee speaking for the company. He wants an apology from Hall himself. He hangs up and takes the revolver back. Desperate for people to hear his side, Tony calls a radio station. The famous DJ, Fred, has just finished his show and is about to leave, but he returns to the mic when he realizes the kidnapper from the news is on the line. Fred tells Tony the call is being recorded because they must consult authorities before airing anything. Tony rants that he has always been poor, but it never bothered him because he worked hard. He says the Hall family ruined his life, and what they did is enough to make a man want to kill. Fred stops the recording and promises to play it the next morning if he gets approval. Tony is grateful, apologizes for cursing, and hangs up. Moments later, the police listen to the tape. They tell Fred to talk about Tony on the radio the next morning to buy time until the FBI takes over. Back in the apartment, Richard says he needs the bathroom. After Richard finishes, Tony shoves him into the bathtub and tells him goodnight. Then he steps out and locks the door. The next morning, Fred plays the tape on the radio. Reporters interview Tony's friends, and they all describe him as a reasonable man. Soon, federal agents arrive outside and join the local police. Tony checks on Richard and offers him donuts, but Richard refuses. On TV, the news shows the Army bomb squad arriving and says they are trying to find a way inside without setting off the booby traps. Tony gets furious, rushes to the window, and yells at them to leave, but they ignore him. Tony calls Fred again and complains about the police tricks. He demands a live press conference on national television. While Fred speaks with him, Fred's wife quietly picks up another phone to listen in. Tony tells Fred he likes him, then hangs up. Outside, George and the police speak with Patrick, an FBI profiler. They explain that Tony comes from a large family of tough people, and that made him tough too. They say he is a loyal friend but a dangerous enemy, and he has no ties to organized crime. They assume he is unstable now. Patrick studies the photos and says Tony is not out of control. He is highly detailed and obsessed with staying in control. Patrick writes what Tony is feeling: angry, betrayed, disrespected, humiliated. Patrick says all of that creates a mess, and the key is respect. Inside, Tony ties Richard back to the chair and rants about the system. Richard says Tony could have grabbed the revolver many times but did not. Tony points the gun at Richard's face and dares him to try. Later, Gallagher calls Tony and says Hall is on the other line, but before speaking, he wants to hear his son's voice. Tony hands the phone to Richard. Richard talks to Hall, who claims he and his wife are worried, even though they are still relaxing on vacation. Richard asks if there is a way out. Hall tells him to let the lawyers handle it. When Richard brings up the apology, Hall refuses, saying he will not apologize for how business works. He will not damage the company's name or admit guilt for something he says he did not do. Richard loses patience, so Tony takes the phone and argues with Hall again. Hall still refuses to apologize. Tony threatens to shoot Richard. Hall says he will mourn his son and regret the day Tony ever walked into his company, then hangs up. Hall's wife breaks down because of his attitude. Tony feels guilty for what Richard is going through and offers him a cigarette. Hours pass with no new progress from police or FBI. That evening, the phone rings and Tony answers fast, only to hear a young voice. Giggles spill out, and Tony realizes teenagers are prank calling him. He hangs up. Richard says they should rest, but Tony refuses until it is over. Outside, Linda meets Tony's brother, Jimmy, who is angry about how the media is portraying Tony. Linda offers him a chance to speak on TV. On camera, Jimmy tells the public that Tony is not a thief or a desperado. He is not asking for money for nothing. He only wants what is owed to him. Inside, Richard is back in the tub and begins praying. Tony practices with the revolver while watching action movies on TV. In the middle of the night, Richard jolts awake after hearing gunshots. He forces himself out of the tub but collapses and yells for help. Tony appears at the bathroom door, covered in blood, screaming. Then Richard snaps awake again, realizing it was only a nightmare. The next day, Richard is back in the chair. Tony asks if he has any pets, and they talk about the life Richard grew up with because of his father's fortune. Richard says he had money, but not a perfect childhood, because Hall was never a loving father. When they talk about mothers, Tony says he will miss his, then quickly changes the subject. He plays music and dances around the apartment. Meanwhile, Fred gets non-stop calls on the radio about Tony. Some women ask if he is single. Neighbors say he is a good man. Strangers call him a hero for fighting the system. Patrick tells the police he has made a deal with the networks to broadcast a press conference because he wants Tony to feel like he has a real audience. Gallagher explains that if things go bad, he will pull out his handkerchief as the signal. Then Michael must grab Tony's shotgun and Gallagher will shoot Tony. The details of the shot and how it will reach the brain make a lawyer vomit. When Tony hears he is getting a press conference, he gets excited and washes up in the bathroom. The police set up equipment, and reporters crowd the area. George steps in front of the cameras and reads an official statement, confirming that prosecutors have granted Tony full immunity from prosecution. Tony watches on TV, smiling, and tells Richard the whole country will soon know his family is the worst. Outside, the setup finishes, and Jimmy calls Tony to say everything is ready. But when Tony turns on the TV, he gets irritated because John Wayne is on a special event, and Tony thinks he cannot compete with that. Michael knocks on the door. Richard begs Tony to let him go, saying he has learned his lesson, promising to change company policies. Tony reattaches the dead man's wire anyway and drags Richard toward the door. Richard panics and only stops when Tony threatens to shoot him. In the corridor, Michael escorts them. Tony receives a document containing a statement from the company. Soon they reach the cameras, and Tony demands to be on all national channels. He claims he has friends all over the country and calls himself a hero. After confirming that Fred and Jimmy are there, Tony orders Richard to read the document. Richard is too scared and keeps stumbling, so Tony takes it back. He asks for a drink and reads it himself. The document admits the company tricked Tony. Tony stops mid-reading to celebrate, ranting about the system and how it exploits poor people. Gallagher is about to pull out his handkerchief, but then Tony reaches the next line, which says Hall takes responsibility for everything. Everyone freezes. Tony starts crying with relief and says he will frame that part. Then he thanks Fred for letting him tell his side, and he apologizes to Richard's family for the trouble. In the hotel, Hall mocks Tony for crying and says his son is superior for staying calm. After Tony walks away with Richard, the broadcast ends. Prosecutors give Tony paperwork to sign to complete the deal, and Michael takes Tony's revolver. Now the police can finally remove the wire from Richard, who is still shaken by his nightmare. Tony fires the shotgun into the ceiling to prove it was loaded, and the police use the moment to tackle him and arrest him. Tony loses control and screams, calling Jimmy a traitor. Outside, people hear the blast and civilians start running. Reporters swarm George, and he tells them Richard is alive, and Tony only fired to prove a point. While the reporters focus on George, Richard is taken into a dark corner to reunite with his wife, and they are rushed away in an ambulance. Tony is dragged to a police car as cameras record everything. Patrick thanks him for cooperating, but Tony keeps insulting them, furious that they lied about immunity. 8 months later, Tony's trial ends, and all national channels broadcast it. The jury finds Tony not guilty by reason of insanity. Tony laughs as he hugs his lawyer and Jimmy. In the back, Richard and Michael watch, disappointed. Outside, Linda records Tony saying he is not crazy. She interviews Richard, who calls it a sad day for justice and insists his company has values. Hundreds of people wait outside for Tony, cheering and calling him a hero. Years later, Tony and Richard see each other in a bakery. They share a look without speaking, and Tony walks away. This is based on a real story. Tony was sent to a mental facility. After 2 years, he became eligible for release, but he refused to sign the papers because they required voluntary psychiatric treatment, and he insisted he did not need it. So he spent another 8 years inside. After the incident, Richard became an alcoholic and the company later went bankrupt. When Richard heard Tony died in 2005, he said he would finally not have to listen to his mouth anymore. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.